you everyone for joining. This is a really cool presentation on the science of reading. And if you're not familiar with science of reading, you will be after this. So I'm going to go ahead and present my screen. Can everyone see that okay? All right, so I'm going to go back to the beginning because that's a good place to start. So evidence-based reading instruction. Today, what we're going to go over is a little bit of a background of the science of reading. What is evidence-based instruction in science of reading? Why evidence-based reading? Science of reading lesson components, application, and resources. So this really is intended for all grades. So whether you teach early elementary, middle school, or high school, there should be something that you can get out of this. So the very first thing that we're going to be doing is we're going to jump right into some reading. What we're going to be doing is reading this article and then having a discussion around it. Down to the third slide in red, that's a link. So, and when we come back, we're going to discuss a couple of questions. We're going to discuss what was your biggest takeaway? What are some of the aspects of a high quality reading program? And how has your thinking changed after reading this, and how has it remained the same? So while you're reading it, those are the things that you're going to be thinking of. As everyone is coming back, if we can go ahead into that Jamboard, and that is where we're going to answer those questions that you were thinking about for the reading. First one is, what are some misconceptions about learning to read? What are the critical aspects of a high quality reading program? And how has your thinking changed, and how has it remained the same? So go ahead and start on any of those pages. You don't have to start on the first page. And does anybody not? All right, let's take a look at the Jamboard. And I'm going to share my screen again so that I can share the Jamboard. All right, can everybody see that? I'm going to take that as a yes because I can't see you now. Yes. Okay, so what are some misconceptions about learning to read? What stands out to you guys on this slide? Do you see any trends?
Most of it had to do with the cueing system that, I mean, we certainly, I know I've been doing it. When we did 4 blocks literacy in the upper grades, and we were looking at showing students how to figure out words that they didn't know, one of the suggestions was always try the word. If you can't figure it out, skip the word, finish the sentence, and then figure out what word makes sense to go along with the meaning of the sentence, and also to look at all of the pictures and organizers, and that seemed to come up a lot.
Yeah.
I think one of the challenges with that is that if you are, trying to cue in on a word and it's a novel word, a word that the student doesn't know, there's absolutely no way to guess a word that you don't know. And I think that if we're actually trying to teach students to read, to take in information, that I was just reading something yesterday that said that by the time a student hits 4th grade, something like 99% of all the words they're going to learn from then on come from text, which means if you're just guessing words that you don't know, you'll never access that text.
No. And I think it was this this podcast that actually goes into and talks about that a little bit too, Wade. I think it gives some of the statistics and things like that. And it also talks about the appropriateness of when you are older and you're reading, that you can use like context clues and those sorts of things. But when you're learning to read, it's really important to know how to break those pieces apart. Any other misconceptions?
I just have to agree with what Wade just said. I struggled as a reader as a kid. And so when I'm reading books or literature and I come to a word I don't know, I can't always use context clues to figure it out. And I have to go find a dictionary. So yeah, I've thought about that a lot as a first grade teacher teaching kids how to read. Like, I'm not the only one with this situation.
Right. Thank you, Cindy, for being brave and sharing that.
I think that as primary teachers, we assume that because this is what we do and this is the land that we live in, is these phonics and these, putting words together, that parents know how to do that with their kids, and they have absolutely no idea. And in order for us to get the support from home, it takes a lot on our part to kind of prepare the parent or show them how can they help their student, because we sat here, Sally and I, and we discussed the fact that, like, we didn't learn like that. I didn't learn this. I learned how to read from learning how to teach how to read, if that makes sense.
It absolutely does.
I think that's so true, Jenna. I think for the first time in my career, I'm teaching students, a number of students who have come into 7th grade not knowing how to read, and I'm scrambling, feeling like, a failure. Oh my goodness, like I'm an English teacher and have been for many, many years, and I don't know how to teach kids how to read. But I think you're right, Jenna. There's been so much chatter about how kids are coming home with different approaches to math, and how, this isn't the type of math that I learned, and I don't understand the processes, but I understand the philosophies behind the processes of math, and it absolutely makes so much sense to me that how it's being taught now. But in terms of broader knowledge about how reading has also changed so drastically, the teaching of reading, rather, has changed so drastically, that's not common knowledge. So we think of math as being drastically different in terms of how it's being taught, but we don't always think about how that's also true of reading and literacy.
And coming from an outside point of view of a non-ELA or elementary teacher, we are not taught how to teach reading at a global citizenship level. So we are relying on ELA teachers. And then when it comes time for us to teach words, at least from my perspective, I am completely lost on how to get kids to understand certain words that are crucial to access the texts that I use.
Can you guys hear me? No.
Yes.
Yes.
It's working? Okay. Anthony, that really rings loud for me. I went back and got my reading specialist degree as a high school English teacher. And I think at the high school level, even in ELA, there's a lot of kind of feeling, without us even meaning to have it, that students already know how to read. And so that practice is not happening. But it's really interesting. I work one-on-one with students, but I use a lot of the same practices now in my whole group instruction, where when we're encountering new words, we talk about the different ways to break them down and sound them out. And then also, like, this word ends with an ly, so probably what part of speech it is, and just a lot of those kind of key syllable understandings. And it really helps all of them. And I think when we talk about like literacy across the curriculum, we need to really realize like that's something we need to do at the high school level, because it's not there. And only by becoming a reading specialist did I realize like how deficit it is. We're just not reinforcing those things. I'm also a mother of a young child, so that's been helpful. I get to practice with him too. And so I can see those building blocks, so the two come together. And I put in there, and I don't know if people agree with this, but there's this idea that I keep bumping up against where there's this like reading is not fun, or kids don't like to read. And so we always have to game it in order to get them to read. And I think by doing that, we're actually reinforcing that it's not fun and they shouldn't like it. And if there's any way that we can go back and dial that back. And I did slam scholastics when I go and see that. And there's like, like a snake necklace attached to a book in order to get a kid to pick it up. I just feel like reading is so fun. And if we, and like, I'll do the voices. I act out the voices for my high school students, and they're like little 5-year-olds. They're into it and they get into it. And I think if we can just embrace that and sell that and keep doing it, and it's going to take a long time, but I think it's worth it.
Well, Linda, keep in mind that you have a bunch, it sounds like you're in high school, and that as those of us who are just learning all of this stuff at elementary level, that I was working with a student literally yesterday, first grader, and she's, we're going through a decodable book. Every single word is either a sight word or it is decodable. There's nothing crazy or surprising in there. And constantly she's just like, oh, I don't know this word. And then she looks over at the picture. And sometimes that helps her get some sense of the word. But again, I keep on just pointing with my pencil. What's this letter say? What sound does this letter make? And she can do that. And then she can put it together. And then she's read the word. And then we do that another 150 times for that word. And then she's got it. So, no problem. By the time they get to you in like 7 years, Linda, we'll have solved all of this. Don't worry.
Wade, that's great.
We appreciate that, Wade.
I'm glad you're laughing.
Thanks, Wade. I'll hang out and wait for that. Okay.
This is an amazing conversation, you guys. I love this. Dawn, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say, and I'm glad Jenna's on the call, because Jenna was my child's first grade teacher. Sorry, Jenna. But I'm just blown away by how amazing of a foundation my kid had in reading. And it's, knowing all the sounds and having that just in their tool belt is just, I'm so grateful to you, Jenna, and all of Nora's teachers for that foundational work that was done. And Nora's an incredible reader. So kudos to you, Jenna, and others, many others.
Wade, the equivalent at the high school level of like looking at the picture, I think, is looking at the first 3 letters of the word and saying any random word that may begin with those first 3 letters. And they will still do it. And I do have to back them up and have them. And so it's a very similar process. And it's just getting them to be vulnerable enough to do it with me.
Yep,
that vulnerability is important.
Yeah.
It's also really important because years ago, a lot of what was happening in school was backed up at home. So students were spending more time out of the classroom reading and looking at things. And now they're not doing that nearly as much as they did years ago. So they hear it from us in that little chunk of time, and then they're not really using it as much. So it makes it even more challenging to build those skills because they're only seeing them in little chunks throughout the day.
Yeah.
Wade, I think it's so that quote, vulnerability is important. That just really hit me. Because, as I'm sure, building on what Linda said, my students are just humiliated when they feel like they can't read at 7th grade. It just, again, supports the social emotional learning that needs to come with literacy as well.
And sorry, I've been talking a lot, Dawn, but you just made me think of something there too. It's like the syllable work, it's breaking down, it's the phonics, but then also just like the regular, non-content specific words. So even if you're in science or social studies or ELA, like doing that preview of some funky words that may appear in something that they're going to read. And then we'll have like some fun with it. I'm trying to think. Oh, abominable was one of the words. And so they were like, oh, that makes me think of a Yeti, And so like we have these different connections with vocab before we get into it. They've played with the word like 3 times and then they encounter it. And then hopefully it's like lodging in their brain. So I think we can do that in our various classrooms to build that vocabulary recognition.
Can I just add to, as a first grade teacher, my frustration for the kids is we give them these foundational skills and we teach them, and then there's always a rule that changes. So we teaches them a rule, and then there's always an exception. And so just when you think the kids are getting it, and then you're like, okay, well, I'm sorry, here's this word that's an exception. So we just have been talking about vowel consonant E, and then I give a sight word give, it's G-I-V-E, and doesn't follow that. So the English language is just so hard at this level because they're so literal. And when you teach them something, that's what the way they want all the words are going to be like that. So if I teach a vowel consonant E rule, then anytime they see that, that's what it's going to be. And then I have to say, oh, I'm sorry, this is an exception. So it is really, really hard for them. And which also goes into, and I think it goes into the secondary level, is meaning. If there's not meaning, whether it's the environment that they are growing up in, or, the lack of what do I want to say? The lack of exposure. If it doesn't have meaning to them, it's that much harder for them. So finding meaning and to make them understand how and the whys of it is really important. And that's just, I think, is another tricky part of teaching it and actually, I should say, learning the English language.
Yeah, Sarah, this is not going to help you as a first grade teacher, but one of the things that the Mind Play course and then also just further exploration has taught me is that there are way fewer exceptions than we see, because we're seeing things, again, you're seeing it from a first grade perspective, and a first grader isn't going to have any sense that this word came from a Germanic root, so this sound spelling is this spelling. And this one came from a Latin root, so the sound spelling for the same sound is these letters. And this is from Greek, and so it's got a completely different. So the rules are internally consistent, but you just have to know like literally 4 different languages to speak English effectively.
Exactly. Jenna and I were talking about that during the, we were looking at the article because we both took the Mind Play course, and it is absolutely fantastic. But I agree. You have to know 4 languages to be able to, when you get.
My 4th graders are happy to have that conversation with me. My 1st graders just look at me like, well, you're speaking a different language now. I'm like, yeah, literally, actually, I am. Sorry, kid.
Exactly.
One other thing. I just wanted to end this for the promotion, and I'm sure it happens in the grade school classrooms where they have time in school to sit and read, and like there's always time to grab your book. And I don't know if this applies to your classroom, Dawn. Here we've been pushing DEAR, where everyone drops and reads for 15 minutes, but also I really have my students read a lot more in class than I used to, because this whole idea of them reading at home, I have so many kids that tell me about when they get to my class that they haven't read a book, like they just haven't in the last years. And I'm like, well, how did you get through? And they have all these strategies to get around reading, but still answering those questions. And so I feel like it's a good use of class time to actually know they're reading. And so I think that's another piece. Like they aren't always reading, but then if we can hook them in and there's some sort of high engagement book that they like, then maybe that will resonate later.
Not with snake necklaces on the book.
They also, I've noticed, students love, as you alluded to earlier, Linda, being read to. Older students love being read to. My students beg me to read to them. I don't know if it hits some nostalgic little place in their hearts about, circled up around the rocking chair when they're in elementary school, but they do crave that as well at the 12, 13, 14 age level too.
I always try to keep in mind that those students, they have, reading that same text is going to be a super challenge for them. So you're giving them the access to a book that they may not have otherwise had any chance of reading. And so that to me is the biggest thing about Read Aloud is it makes the text accessible to every student. All you need is a pair of ears. So.
All right, let's look at our next slide. We're going to go through the next couple maybe a little bit quicker, because I do want you guys to be able to have some time to implement this into your own work. So the second question was, what are the critical aspects of high quality reading program? Does anybody want to share what they wrote?
I particularly added ways to practice. So we use Foundations here, which aligns itself to the science of reading. And Orton Gillingham is supposed to be fantastic for those with dyslexia and hopefully being able to kind of see some of the red flags coming up through and being able to provide those interventions a little bit earlier. So I think that that's great. It's also very challenging to find decodable readers in like hard copies that you can have as a school library. I have tons of paper copies of them, and I have tons of access to that kind of stuff where we can print it and mark it up. But something about holding a book, I think, and turning the pages, and that is a skill that we don't necessarily have books that go along with that. We have a lot of leveled readers, which have the trick words or the words that don't follow the rules that we're necessarily teaching. And that's okay when you get a little bit higher in the reading, but when you're still in the foundational lower level, 1 through 12 books, it's very, very tricky because they haven't exactly come out with a Lexile level yet. Everybody gets a BR. You're a beginning reader. What does that mean? You know what I mean? Is there a quantitative way that we can say these are the skills they have, these are the skills that they don't? Foundations provides that, but there's not really another source that we have, if that makes sense. I think that a program needs to incorporate everything, and especially at our grade level, writing. We are teaching those phonics, those graphemes, put it together. Show me you can put it together. Show me you can pull it apart. That is all encompassing, I think.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Jenna. And one of the things that Lindsay and I have actually been doing is looking at the books that come with Foundations, and they're actually not all truly decodable books. So that's one of the big problems. And if you read some other articles, Foundations doesn't actually truly follow the science of reading. There's a lot of aspects of it in there, and it's a great program for us to be able to have and use, but it's not ideal. And just so that everybody knows, Lindsay has been looking into a lot of different things and trying to figure out how to get decodable readers into students' hands. Let's skip quickly to the next one. And that was, how has this changed your thinking, or how has your thinking remained the same? Anybody want to shout out about that? And we have, I think some of these conversations have come up a little bit in that first one, but I just want to make sure that anybody who hasn't had a voice can have one now. Linda?
I just put my hand up. There's just one thing I put on there that I think is really important that goes along with like just using the picture. I have seen, like when I work with students in science or social studies class, where they will answer a question based on a text, and they're pulling words and they pop them in, and they can use those words correctly in those answers, but they actually don't know what the word means. And so they know that those tasks of how to do it, and they've become really skilled at placing those things in the right places, but they don't know what the words are. And so that's what we work on, is like how to get that meaning and more understanding by using the rest of the context. But it's quite a craft. It's impressive to see, but they don't know what they're saying.
Yeah. All right. That was awesome, you guys. Thank you so much for sharing all those thoughts and ideas. And it sounds like the article was a good one to share. So now let's go back to our presentation. Share. Okay. It is not skipping ahead for me. Okay. Here we go. So I'm just going to go through this quickly because we've talked about a lot of these things. So what the science of reading is, what evidence-based reading instruction is it systematic and explicit instruction. And those are some big key takeaways. That it includes phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension, and that it's multisensory. So I think it was Jenna that mentioned foundations. So foundations is multisensory. I just lost my thought. Orton Gillingham, multisensory. But there's lots of ways that we can make things multisensory, even if they're not designed to be that way. And so doing different things that way to make sure our kids are touching it, hearing it, seeing it is how that brain is going to get it, to learn it and keep it, hang on to it. So why evidence-based reading practices? There are, for the next there's 6 to 11 slides. And I'm going to let you guys take just a couple minutes to go through these, and you can always go back after. I just, I really want to make sure that I'm, like I said, I'm giving you some time to dive into this stuff. And so there are lots of different quotes. So just take a few minutes to read through some of these quotes. And if you need the slideshow again, let me know and I'll put it back in the chat. Is there anything that's really jumping out to people like, oh, wow? You'd like to share?
Hi, I can share real quick. So
Thanks.
the first slide 6, it says 75% of students who do not read proficiently by 3rd grade never reach reading proficiency in future grades. And I'm the 3rd and 4th grade teacher at Proctor, and this like resonated with me so much because by 3rd and 4th grade, we're not learning how to read. We're like trying to take information from our texts. And my kids come in from 2nd grader and they have the deficiencies in reading, and they're like lacking in those reading skills, and they're already behind. And it's like, if I'm I find it really challenging because if I'm teaching pulling information from books, I just feel like, so yes, I'm getting all mixed up with my words right now, but yes, it really, really resonated with me. I was like, this is exactly how I feel about this.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I think it's very scary that 60% of teachers have not had proper instruction on how to teach reading. That's a very scary thought.
I'm going to tie those two together, and I'm going to say if 75% of students in 3rd grade never reach proficiency, it's largely because most of us have never been trained. I remember my training from my master's, and it was all Calkins and F&P and all the stuff that is not part of science of reading. So I'm going to take those two and tie them into the second slide there. I guess that would be slide 7, where it says 95% of elementary students, regardless of background, are capable of learning to read when they receive that direct instruction that we have not yet been able to provide for them. So 30% are going to get there on their own, regardless of us. And 50%, with just tier 1, we can get them there. But then there's that additional 15% that we can reach with these strategies. So I'm optimistic.
Yeah. I think that I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that I think that what's really needed in some of the schools is a person just in the primary grades that is going to help us. We have such limited time in the day to do such huge growth and gains. I mean, we're talking like aren't really reading when they come in and are reading, basic text when they leave. That doesn't happen overnight. And for some of the kids that, in our past years, COVID or are sick or can't be here and miss something, those are stepping stones. You can't miss. And I think that we really need to get down to the pre-K, first grade, kindergarten level of this and provide such intensive instruction if we are going to see any type of benefit. And it's only because that's developmentally where we build these building blocks.
Yep, exactly.
Jenna, just to clarify, were you advocating for like an interventionist at the primary levels? Is that what you were saying?
Yeah, we have Margot, and she is absolutely fabulous. But when you have 200 kids in your school, and we're talking about this many kids that are gonna need some type of boost, whether it be, a month because they missed a skill, or, these in and out groups that we talk about, when we have such a level of deficit with certain kids that's so pervasive all the way through, that takes a lot of the services away from those who just need that little bit of boost or need that skill repetition. So I think that would be fabulous. I just think that there's a lot of kids that need it and not a lot of positions to intervene.
I think
I would love that at Poultney High School too. Reading interventionist at Poultney High School.
Well,
just putting that out there.
I think the thing that stands out to me, it says 60%, but I would argue probably 0 or a very small percentage of teachers at the high school level are taught how to teach kids how to read, because it's just, we would assume they know how to read already. I think if you don't get an interventionist, it's also like all these spotlight activities we can do in our classrooms where we're practicing with whole group instruction. Like there's things like that that we can do, and reminding ourselves that like if they're not reading, then they can't get that content. So maybe we should dial it back. We have been an identified school, and so like our kids come here below grade level, and I know like that's just, there's so many things that feed into it. It's not reading instruction coming to us, but where can we, knowing that like we also have to take responsibility of that. So if like a kid is below grade level in my class, I still want him to make growth even if I'm not getting him up to grade level. So like, how do I do that? There's all these things where I think we just feel defeated sometimes, like they didn't get it and it was during that crucial time when they needed it. But what gains can we make even when they missed it because of COVID or trauma or something that was in their lives at the time?
So true. All right, I'm going to move us along. So this next slide is showing us what a typical science of reading lesson looks like. So this is for K1 and 2, and it breaks it down to how many minutes of phonological awareness in those first 3 foundational grades. And then the print concepts, phonics, fluency, and then comprehension strategies. We need to make sure somehow, and I know how impossible this can be, that we have 45 minutes that are spent just in those phonological awareness, print, phonics, and fluency pieces. That is where the majority of our time in K1 and 2 needs to be. And for the upper elementary, we need to have phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. And the phonemic awareness piece could be per student, but in the situations as we've been in the last couple of years, I'm imagining that this is going to be whole group. And for middle and high school, again, phonemic awareness as needed per class or student, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. And a workshop model is a really great way of getting all these pieces in, so you can be working with small groups of students while other students are doing other things. And so here is your chance to apply this. So there's a few different options that you can take and go do for the last, I think we have about half an hour. You can revamp an upcoming foundations lesson. You can look at a reading lesson and find a piece of that unit or lesson to tweak. Or maybe you're a science teacher or a social studies teacher and you want to take a lesson. How are you going to tweak it to make the reading available for students? How does this apply to something that students are reading or writing regardless of the topic? Time to look at the resources slides. So I'm going to, at the end of this presentation, there's a resources slide with all kinds of different resources. You can, using that K-2 chart on slide 12, review your schedule. So if you're a K1 or 2 teacher, go ahead and look at your schedule. Imagine like you had carte blanche, like you could arrange your schedule to fit this science of reading idea. How would you make it better? What would you change? And so here's the resources. There's lots of different resources here. You could go back to that article that we had earlier. You could listen to the podcast.